We are talking Pumpkinhead from 1988, or as we knew it in the UK, Vengeance the Demon, as its original VHS title. Pumpkinhead 1988, directed by Stan Winston. Of course, that Stan Winston, most notably known for VFX work, but here he has his directorial debut, and this one stars Lance Henriksen. It was also notable for a small role and debut for Mayan Bayek, Amy Farrah Fowler from the Big Bang Theory. I don't actually know how you pronounce her actual name, but there you go. So this was the start of a kind of lower budget franchise. I believe there's 4 films in the Pumpkinhead series. I've seen at least the original prior to this. I might have seen the second film, although I don't think I've seen 3 and 4. So this is a movie that I've always wanted to kind of get round to watching and reviewing for the channel, and I finally did it. I always used to kind of think this and the unnameable were kind of somewhat interchangeable. So Pumpkinhead, what's it all about? So the budget of this one was reportedly around $3.5 million. So low budget, but not super low. So it was a studio picture, I believe. And the story focuses on a group of city dwellers, city folk, young people coming out to the country for shits and giggles. And Lance Henriksen's character is a rural living man out in the kind of the country who owns like a grocery store in the kind of the rural areas of this particular part of America. He has a young son, and these city dwelling folk, they come into the country, they start causing havoc, and they accidentally end up causing the death of Lance Henriksen's character's young son. Now it is an accident, but nonetheless, Lance Henriksen's character is understandably upset, and he hears rumours of a witch living deep within the forest that can somewhat grant wishes. Now, she can't bring the dead boy back to life, but she can exact revenge on these young people with a terrible cost. And how she does this is there is a kind of a ritual which can summon a demon, and this demon will take revenge on those responsible for whatever crime the person summoning them wants. And this is what Lance Henriksen desires, at least initially. So this demon gets kind of resurrected, called Pumpkinhead because he is summoned from a kind of a pumpkin patch within this graveyard. I suspect this is why it was called Vengeance the Demon in the UK, probably because people might think it's a literal person with a pumpkin on its head, perhaps. But anyway, and yes, so this demon goes off to get revenge, and then Lance Henriksen's character sort of has a little bit of a crisis of conscience where he sort of necessarily changes his mind about what he's asked for. But what will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, with this director, obviously primarily known for VFX work, one thing's to be sure here, and that is the VFX are good. And that is true. So, practical VFX, a 1988 movie, and obviously having Stan the Man as the director, he's using his VFX company to do all these VFX, although apparently he wasn't directly involved in much of the VFX himself because he was busy directing. But it's a fun monster. It kind of looks a little bit like an alien xenomorph from the Alien kind of series, and it's a creature that sort of somewhat evolves through the movie with slightly kind of different looks. And it's a pretty freaky looking monster, like a giant sort of spindly looking creature with a huge head, a huge bulbous head. And this creature dispatches its victims in quite a kind of gruesome manners. Even our kind of witch is a kind of like a great makeup job with kind of looking very kind of gnarly and clearly very old. On top of that, I think the set design is particularly creepy. It kind of looks a little bit like, almost like it should be from The Nightmare Before Christmas, a kind of a Tim Burton sort of style aesthetic to some of the kind of the set design here, particularly this kind of graveyard scene. I would arguably say it's a little over-designed, to be honest. It may be, you know, you've got loads of dry ice, you've got kind of light streaming from somewhere, kind of making it look all spooky, but we don't really know. It doesn't really make sense, but it looks cool. But it looks a little bit 80s, let me just say that. But it still looks kind of, you know, fun and creepy and very gothic, albeit a little bit sort of, as I say, cheesy potentially. But he looks cool for the fun elements that we have here. One of the elements that I did like is that although this movie does play like a very standard monster on the loose chasing teen type movie, there are a few things here that I think it does have a little bit of nuance. For example, this little boy that gets killed, it is a genuine accident that these young people, you know, caused death by this kid. Oh, yeah, you could argue they might have been a little careless, but they certainly didn't mean to do it, and a lot of them seemed genuinely sort of distressed and trying to help this boy afterwards. So, you know, there's really one guy who's a typical sort of douchey one and stuff, but I like the fact that, you know, they're not malicious necessarily. They are. At least a lot of them are actually completely innocent, really. They just happen to have been part of this group. There's only one, really, that's sort of more directly involved. So that was kind of, you know, a little bit of a change here, because we do feel some sympathy for this group of young people. You know, and they're trying to kind of find a phone and try and call for help and things like that. And, you know, so there is a little bit of kind of nuance to these, you know, these victims, because ultimately, like I said, there was no genuine malicious intent, even with the person who actually ended up doing it. And then with Lance Henriksen's character, you know, they make him somewhat of a complex character here, because initially he just wants revenge, but, you know, he sort of sees that what he's asked for is terrible and people are kind of, you know, they're dying in terrible sort of ways. And as such, it gives his sort of character, you know, he ends up becoming a sort of somewhat of a protagonist, trying to help these kind of young people try and sort of defeat this demon. And the interesting thing with the demon, outside of the kind of the aesthetic side of stuff, is that they give you some idea about what this demon is and what it does, but there's still, you know, some degree of ambiguity about how the whole kind of situation works. But you get enough of an idea through the movie about, you know, the context of this kind of creature, and, you know, how it sort of works without sort of spelling out everything for you. So that all, I all think, you know, makes for sort of quite an interesting kind of mythology for this kind of creature. And I think the movie's end is pretty strong, certainly in regards to the Lance Henriksen character. And I gotta say, I think it does have some kind of emotional beats here. The little boy they've cast, you know, he's a very cute little boy, and, you know, when he gets killed, it's not straight away. He sort of, you know, he ends up sort of taking a little bit of time to end up sort of passing and stuff. So it's quite sort of sad, and we see the sort of the sorrow from, you know, Lance Henriksen's character. We have a kind of a group of sort of hillbilly kind of redneck types, and on one hand they kind of make them very sort of typical kind of redneck types, but at the same time, you know, even they have a little bit of sort of characters with them. You know, we get one younger guy that tries to help Lance Henriksen's character again. So, you know, they have a little bit of humanity to them as well. They're not typical, like, just like cannibals or anything like that. So I kind of like some of the kind of the smaller little elements here that that populates, to be honest with you, an otherwise somewhat sort of generic monster on the loose story. So, but there are some elements that I do think, you know, kind of reasonable here. Once the kind of the creature gets going, it really never stops. It's almost like a kind of a Terminator. It's sort of continuously sort of hunting these kind of creatures. So that, again, it gives it a good level of tension to a degree. What doesn't work, like I've said, I do think that this movie is a little bit guilty of a little bit over-designed sometimes. The use of kind of backlights and things. It all looks fun and sort of like 80s kind of creepy, but, you know, think, well, where's that light coming from? You know, if you really want to be picky and stuff. So there's, again, a few kind of minor things here and there. Where I have some a little bit more substantial criticism, I would say some of the editing I think is quite poor. Now, this was Stan Winston's directorial debut, and I presume he had some say in the editing. And if you take, for example, the second victim, the Pumpkinhead creature kills out of the kind of this group of teens, there's like a prologue. This is this woman, and there's some really poor editing. The way that's kind of this creature is sort of dragging her along. It just seems to have some really like hard edits, and you feel like it needed to transition better. So if I just look at that scene, for example, I think that's a good example of how the sort of the editing's a little rough, to be honest. Some of the kind of the character work here is, you know, I like some of the subtleties in regards to our kind of human characters, but at the same time, I do think there's some sort of massive overreactions. Like, so when this you got this guy on the bike who kills this little boy, you know, he like drives off and he goes, oh, I don't want anything to do with it. He sort of drives off, and then they're trying to kind of call an ambulance, and he's pulling the phone line out of the wall. And that's all, you know, now you're kind of complicit in trying to kind of, this will be manslaughter rather than an accident, because you've like, now you're trying to cover up. And then he even assaults one of his friends and locks them in a room, and it's just like, there's some elements here that are kind of silly in regards to that. And I just think, yeah, there are some good stuff, and some characters make some sensible decisions within this movie, but at the same time, I do think there are some elements here where it's a little bit hokey, and it kind of just seems a little bit sort of sillier at times, and some of the characters do look a little bit like they're being complete idiots and stuff like that. It's not maybe as gory as you'd probably expect. It's not a particularly gruesome movie in any particular way. And it does follow a somewhat predictable path in regards to its overall sort of story beats. Outside of a few little elements here and there, you know, it is a kind of a creature on the loose, chasing teens. You know, it's nothing special in the overall kind of story elements here, although it does have a few flourishes. So overall, it's probably an above average creature feature, although I don't think it's especially, you know, outstanding in some respects. It's certainly worth a watch if you haven't seen it, if you like a watchable and entertaining movie, but I don't think it's a masterpiece by any stretch. I will give this one a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Please do let me know what your thoughts are, and I'll look forward to you next time. Bye for now.